Promised. We are here. We are present. We are accounted for. And it is time. Are you excited? I'm excited. I'm intrigued to find out that we have a whole bunch of time in between being underwater and being caught by a net. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. John O'Keefe, Mr. O to many of you. Welcome to the third day of the Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane by Kate D. Camillo. I want to say how grateful I am that we have begun this adventure again. I want to say how happy I am that you chose to come and spend a little bit of time doing a little bit of reading. So let's talk about this. We had a really good summary at the end of yesterday, or at least I was really proud of it. I kept to the characters, I kept to the significant events, I kept brief, I kept to the ideas that will carry us through until the next one. So let's just talk about some of those high points. Spoiled China rabbit, loving young girl who owns the rabbit. A grandmother who tells a strange story, a boat trip to London, boys playing keep away, a gold watch dropping, a naked rabbit falling over the edge, spending like 290 some odd days underwater, thinking and doing a little bit of feeling, and then a terrible storm, and then an incredible fortune where a net catches our main character, our significant rabbit, and he is brought to the surface by an old fisherman, brought to land, and the last things that we have are these words in chapter 7. In fact, Edward Tulane was so happy to be back among the living that he did not even take umbrage at being referred to as it. Now, we do have to recognize, sometimes we want to pay very close attention to gender, right? Up until this point, we have been spoken to as Edward was a he. At this point, the fisherman refers to Edward as an it. And some very interesting adventures are ahead of us in this next piece. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we begin chapter 8, I will grace you with the beautiful picture of Edward and a fisherman so that you can have a little bit of a picture of what at least the author and illustrator believed the fisherman to look like. Oh, and a naked rabbit. On land, the old fisherman stopped to light a pipe, and then, with the pipe clenched between his teeth, he walked home, carrying Edward atop his left shoulder as if he were a conquering hero. The fisherman balanced him there, placing a calloused hand at Edward's back. He talked to him in a soft, low voice as they walked. "You'll like Nellie, you will," said the old man. "She had her sadness, but she's an all right girl." Edward looked at the small town blanketed in dusk, a jumble of buildings huddled together, the ocean stretching out in front of it all, and he thought that he would like anything and anybody that was not at the bottom of the sea. "Hello, Lawrence," called a woman from the front of a shop. "What have you got there?" "Fresh catch," said fisherman. "Fresh rabbit from the sea." He lifted his cap to the lady and kept walking. "There you are now," said the fisherman. He took the pipe out of his mouth and pointed with the stem of it at a star in the purpling sky. "There's your North Star right there. Don't ever have to be lost when you know where that fellow is." Edward considered the brightness of the small star. "Do they all have names?" he wondered. "Listen at me," said the fisherman. "Talking to a toy. Oh, well, here we are then." And with Edward still on his shoulder, the fisherman walked up a stone-lined path and into a little green house. "Look," he said, "I've brought you something from the sea." "I don't want nothing from the sea," came a voice. "Oh, now, don't be like that now. Come and see, then." An old woman stepped out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. When she saw Edward, she dropped the apron and clapped her hands together and said, "Oh, Lawrence, you brung me a rabbit." "Direct from the sea," said Lawrence. He took Edward off his shoulders and stood him up on the floor and held on to his hands and made him take a deep bow in the direction of Nellie. "Oh," said Nellie, "here." She clapped her hands together again, and Lawrence passed Edward to her. Nellie held the rabbit out in front of her and looked him over from tip to toe. She smiled. "Have you ever in your life seen anything so fine?" she said. Edward felt immediately that Nellie was a very discerning woman. "She's beautiful," breathed Nellie. For a moment, Edward was confused. Was there some other object of beauty in the room? "What will I call her?" "Susanna," said Lawrence. "Just right," said Nellie. "Susanna." She took a deep look into Edward's eyes. "First off, Susanna, we'll need some clothes, won't she?" Here is Nellie. Here is Lawrence. Here is Susanna. Did you catch that? Nellie called Edward a she. Nellie believes that Edward is a Susanna. And she's going to be making some wonderful, wonderful clothing for her. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are in chapter 9. And one must enjoy this beautiful picture of Edward. I love this picture of Edward. It's all right to be in a dress sometimes. All right, chapter 9. And so Edward Tulane became Susanna. Nellie sewed several outfits for him. A pink dress with ruffles for special occasions, a simple shift fashioned out of a flower-covered cloth for everyday use, and a long white gown made of cotton for Edward to sleep in. In addition, she remade his ears, stripping them of the few pieces of fur that remained, and designed him a new pair of ears. "Oh," she told him when she was done, "you look lovely, Susanna." He was horrified at first. He was, after all, a boy rabbit. He did not want to be dressed as a girl. And the outfits, even the special occasion dress, were so simple, so plain. They lacked the elegance and artistry of his real clothes. But then Edward remembered lying on the ocean floor, the muck in his face, the stars so far away, and he said to himself, "What difference does it make, really? Wearing a dress won't hurt me." Besides, life in the little green house with the fisherman and his wife was sweet. Nellie loved to bake, and so she spent her day in the kitchen. She put Edward on the counter and leaned him up against the flour canister and arranged his dress around his knees. She bent his ears so that he could hear well. And then she set to work, kneading dough for bread and rolling out dough for cookies and pies. The kitchen soon filled with the smell of baking bread and with the sweet smells of cinnamon and sugar and cloves. Can you almost smell it? Katie Camilla does such a nice job, especially with baked goods. The windows steamed up in the house, and while Nellie worked, she talked. She told Edward about her children, her daughter, Lolly, who was a secretary, and her boys, Ralph, who was in the army, and Raymond, who had died of pneumonia when he was only 5 years old. "Oh, he drowned inside of himself," said Nellie. "It's a horrible, terrible thing, the worst thing, to watch somebody you love die right in front of you and not be able to do nothing about it. I dream about him most nights." Nellie wiped at her tears with the back of her hands. She smiled at Edward. "I suppose you think I'm daft, talking to a toy. It seems to me that you are listening, Susanna." And Edward was surprised to discover that he was listening. Before, when Abilene talked to him, everything had seemed so boring, so pointless. But now, the stories Nellie told struck him as the most important thing in the world, and he listened as if his life depended on what she said. It made him wonder if some of the muck from the ocean floor had gotten inside his china head and damaged him somehow. In the evening, Lawrence came home from the sea, and there was dinner, and Edward sat at the table with the fisherman and his wife. Connection. He gets to sit at the table again. He sat in an old wooden high chair. And while at first he was mortified, a high chair, after all, was a chair designed for babies, not for elegant rabbits, he soon became used to it. He actually liked being up high, looking out over the table instead of staring at the white tablecloth that he had in the Tulane household. He liked feeling like he was a part of things. Every night after dinner, Lawrence said that he thought he would go out and get some fresh air and that maybe Susanna would like to come with him. He placed Edward on his shoulders, as he had that first night when he walked him through the town, bringing him home to Nellie. They went outside, and Lawrence lit his pipe and held Edward there on his shoulder. And if the night was clear, Lawrence said the names of the constellations one at a time. Andromeda, Pegasus, pointing at them with the stem of his pipe. Edward loved looking up at the stars, and he loved the sound of the constellation names. They were sweet in his ears. Sometimes, though, staring up at the night sky, Edward remembered Pellegrina, saw again her dark and glowing eyes, and a chill would go through him. Warthogs, he would think. Witches. But Nellie, before she put him to bed each night, sang Edward a lullaby, a song about a mockingbird that did not sing and a diamond ring that would not shine. And the sound of Nellie's voice soothed the rabbit, and he forgot all about Pellegrina. Life, for a very long time, was sweet. And then, ooh, did you hear that? That "and then" twists it, doesn't it? Let me reread that. Life for a very long time was sweet. And then Lawrence and Nellie's daughter came for a visit. Do you hear how it compares and contrasts? Do you see how it goes from things being really sweet, and then that word "and then," or that phrase "and then," makes a twist? Now, what do we know about Lolly? We know that Lolly is a daughter. We know that Lolly is a secretary. Nellie told Edward that while they were baking one day. But we don't know much about it, with the exception of me hearing the words, "Life was very sweet for a long time." And then, that lets me think Lolly's not going to be very nice. Chapter 10. What does that represent? Huh. You're right. You're right, Mag. You hear it, right? Kate, did you get it? Anya, did you get it? Anybody else? Lolly was a lumpy woman who spoke too loudly and who wore too much lipstick. Now I already know a little bit more about. She entered the house and immediately spotted Edward sitting on the living room couch. "What's this?" she said. She put down her suitcase and picked Edward up by one foot. She held him upside down. "That's Susanna," said Nellie. "Susanna?" shouted Lolly. She gave Edward a shake. His dress was up over his head, and he could see nothing. Already he had formed a very deep and abiding hatred for this woman, Lolly. "Your father found her," said Nellie. "She came up in a net, and she didn't have no clothes on her, so I made her some dresses." "Have you gone skivvy?" shouted Lolly. "Rabbits don't need clothes." "Well," said Nellie, shook. "The rabbits, this one seems to need some." Lolly tossed Edward back on the couch, arms over his heads and his dress still over his face, and he stayed that way all the way through dinner. "Why have you got out that old shouted Lolly. "Oh, don't pay it no mind," said Nellie. "Your father was just gluing on a missing piece. Wasn't you, Lawrence?" "Right," said Lawrence, without looking up from his plate. Of course, after dinner, Edward did not go outside and stand beneath the stars. And Nellie, for the first time since Edward had been with her, did not sing him a lullaby. In fact, Edward was forgotten about until the next morning, when Lolly picked him up again, pulled his dress down away from his face, and stared him deep in his blue eyes. "Got the old folks bewitched, don't you?" said Lolly. "I heard the talk in town. They've been treating you like a..." Edward stared back at Lolly. Her lipstick was a bright and bloody red. He felt a cold breeze blow through. She gave him a shake. "We'll be taking a trip together, you and..." Holding Edward by the ears, Lolly marched into the kitchen and shoved him face down into the garbage can. "Some errands." "Oh," came Nellie's tremulous voice. "Wonderful, dear. Goodbye, then." "Goodbye," thought Edward as Lolly hauled the garbage can out to the truck. "Bye," Nellie called again, louder this time. Edward felt a sharp pain somewhere deep inside his china chest. The first time his heart called out to him. It said two words: "Nellie, Lawrence." Chapter 11. You notice anything strange? What do you infer from this picture? Oh, where is Susanna? Where is Edward? What has Lolly done to him? Chapter 11. Edward ended up at the dump. He lay on top of orange peels, coffee grounds, rancid bacon, and rubber tires. The first night, he was at the top of the garbage heap, and so he was able to look up at the stars and find comfort in their light. In the morning, a short man came climbing through the trash and rubble. He stopped when he was standing on top of the highest pile. He put his hands under his armpits and flapped his elbows. The man crowed loudly. He shouted, "Who am I? I am Ernest, Ernest who is king of the world. How can I be king of the world? Because I am the king of garbages. The garbages and what the world is made of. Therefore, I am Ernest, Ernest who is king of the world," he crowed again. Edward was inclined to agree with Ernest's assessment of the world being made of garbage, especially after his second day at the dump, when a load of trash was deposited directly on top of him. He lay there, buried alive. He could not see the sky. He could not see the stars. He could not see anything. What kept Edward going, what gave him hope in this moment, was thinking of how he would find Lolly and exact his revenge. He would pick her up by the ears. He would bury her under a mountain of trash. But after almost 40 days and 40 nights had passed, the weight and the smell of garbage above and below him clouded Edward's thoughts, and soon he gave up thinking about revenge and gave in to despair. It was worse, much worse than being buried at sea. It was worse because Edward was a different rabbit now. He couldn't say how he was different. He just knew he was different. He remembered again Pellegrina's story about the princess who had loved nobody. The witch turned her into a warthog because she loved nobody. He understood that now. He heard Pellegrina say, "You disappoint me." "Why?" he asked her. "Why do I disappoint you?" But he knew the answer to the question. Do you know the reason why? What are some of your thoughts? Why? Why was he disappointing Pellegrina? What was it that she felt from him? Why, he asked. Why do I disappoint you? But he knew the answer to that question too. It was because he had not loved Abilene enough. And now she was gone from him, and he would never be able to make it right. And Nellie and Lawrence were gone too. He missed them terribly. He wanted to be with them. The rabbit wondered if that was love. Day after day passed, and Edward was aware of time passing only because every morning he could hear Ernest performing his dawn ritual, cackling and crowing about being king of the world of garbage. On his 180th day at the dump, salvation arrived for Edward in a most unusual form. The garbage around him shifted, and the rabbit heard the sniff, sniff, sniffing and panting of a dog. Then came the frenzied sound of digging. The garbage shifted again, and suddenly, miraculously, the beautiful buttery light of late afternoon shone on Edward's face. I have to read one more chapter. I'm sorry. Can I? May I? May I? I can't stop right there. I was supposed to stop right there, but I can't. Chapter 12. Chapter 12 must be read right now. Edward did not have much time to savor the light, for the dog above him, dark and shaggy, blocking his view. Edward was pulled out of the garbage by his ears, dropped, and then picked up in the middle and shaken back and forth with a great deal of ferocity. The little dog growled deep in its throat and then dropped Edward again in the eye. Edward stared back.
Hey, get out of here, you dog!
It was Ernest, king of garbages, king of the world. The dog grabbed Edward by his paint dress and took off running. That's mine! That's mine, old garbage! Ernest shouted, you come back here! But the little dog did not stop. The sun was shining and Edward felt exhausted. Who, having known him before, would have known or would have thought that he could be so happy now, crusted over with garbage, wearing a dress, the slobbery mouth of a dog, and being chased by a madman. But he was happy. The dog ran and the railroad track. They crossed over the tracks, and there, underneath a scraggly tree, in a circle of bushes, Edward was dropped in a pair of feet. The dog began to bark. Edward looked up and saw that the feet were attached to an enormous, said the man. He bent and picked up Edward. "I is a true delight, one of the pleasures of our existence." Lucy let out a yip. "And what we have here, what you have so graciously delivered to me, a rabbit, but the best chef in the world would be hard-pressed to make him into a pie," Lucy growled. "Is made of china, girl." The man held Edward closer to him. They looked each other in the eye. "You're..." He gave Edward a playful shake. "You're some child's toy, am I right? And you have been separated." Edward felt, again, the sharp pain in his chest. He thought of Abilene. The dust descending and Abilene running toward him. Yes, Abilene had loved him. "That is my guess. Lucy and I are lost too." "Perhaps," said the man, "you are lost with us. I have found it much more agreeable to be lost in the company of others. My name is Bull. As you may have surmised, is my dog. Would you care to join us?" Bull waited for a moment, staring at Edward. Firmly around Edward's waist, the man reached one enormous finger up and touched Edward's head. "Yes," said Bull. "Malone has agreed to travel with us. Isn't that swell?" Lucy danced around. And so it was that Edward took to the road with a hobo and his dog. And that is the end of chapter 12. Bull. I kind of like the voice that I chose for him. It's the one that just came out when I was reading. I love that. I love when a voice is forming in your head about what you hope that person might sound like. Do you do that when you read? I do that when I read. I love making up new characters because if they're just black and white words on a page, that's not as interesting, right? So finding a voice for each of those characters. Kate DiCamillo invented them to have voices. She invented, the opportunity for us to meet different characters, meeting different people at different times. Have you noticed that Kate DiCamillo really likes to use repetition? Have you noticed the number of times that she uses what's called the rule of three? Have we talked about that before? If we haven't talked about the rule of three, we need to. The rule of three is one of these things that at least in English culture, or at least in American culture, my fairy tale culture, the one that I was brought up with, things happen in threes, right? Goldilocks and the Three Bears, the Three Little Pigs, the Three Blind Mice. You may notice that lots of things, maybe even some of the television shows that you watch, or cartoons, or movies, or whatever you watch, sometimes things happen three times. Now, it's interesting because in different cultures, like Native American culture, many things happen in fours. But I don't also know if you happen to notice, but I try really, really diligently to accentuate when something happens three times, even words. There was the time where he was going down, down, down to the bottom of the ocean. There was a time where he was being lifted up, up, up into the net. There are often times where something shows up. And we in this culture, maybe Mag, in Brazilian culture, you can teach me as well. Is that a typical part of other cultures as well, that they have these repetitions of threes or fours? Keep your eyeballs out because that stuff happens. Well, summarizing, we met a fisherman named Lawrence. We met his lovely wife, Nellie, so sweet, so alone in a small green house. Edward, or Susanna, arrives and makes life better for some time until Lolly shows up and obviously is somehow jealous of a stuffed China doll and decides to throw Edward away. I was always troubled by that. I was always troubled by what is it with Lolly and why does she have this anger or frustration or jealousy or whatever it is that she has. But being thrown in the garbage has given Edward another involuntary journey and an unknowing peace. And have you noticed the time in between meetings? I think the first time was like 290 some days, and this time it was 180 days. There are long stretches of time where nothing really happens. And I'm super grateful that Kate DiCamillo does a little bit of hurrying through that moment so that we don't have to be tripped up on that. But a dog finds Edward, Susanna, and now I believe he has a new name, Malone, kept being referred to as Malone. But now Bull wants to include Malone on this adventure that he and his dog Lucy are on. And that's where we'll pick up next week. So I want to let you know how grateful I am. Thank you so much for being here during the live part. That makes it so much better. I'd love to see some of your verbal to visuals. I would love for you to share those so that others who are less experienced with verbal to visuals can maybe see how your summaries in picture form and word form give a little bit of story time to you. And I know, Mag, you've been starting yours. Thank you for sending me your beautiful title page. Kate and Anya, I hope you are having a wonderful, wonderful time. I'm so glad that you've taken the challenge to read over your holiday break. I'm so glad that you chose this wonderful book. It makes me feel like I'm a part of, so that maybe Bull and Lucy and Malone and all of us can go on this. So we will see you on Monday, 3 o'clock Eastern time. I love you. Have a great week. This beautiful, beautiful time that you have. And until we see each other again, I love you. Now, get out. Go have fun. Go do other stuff. Bye.